Hey everyone, my name is Lavette.
My name is Khalil.
My name's Jessica.
And I'm Diana. And for our first podcast, we're going to be talking about historical intersection between race and science.
Yeah, so I think a cool topic that maybe we could start off with is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Does everyone know a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Um, I guess does anyone have any opinions about how that whole experiment has shaped America's definition of race and honestly has proven it through their inability to give any what can I say? You could just see the little power that Black people have in America because they didn't even something as basic as understanding your own health, they weren't able to know. Like it was hidden from them.
Can you give us about what year was this taking?
I think this was in the 60s, I believe. Let me make sure.
So the thing that I think about when we were just talking about it was the pandemic that we're in now with COVID. So like if Black people, for example, were given COVID now without their knowledge, just like they were given syphilis without their knowledge, what would their reactions be now compared to the 60s? So it just, I think it speaks in it's weighted more, I feel like, now, because African American population and community has um, come along. um, they fought and they struggled really hard to be where they are now, and that's not saying that they have full rights as um, the majority, the white community, which is the majority community. Um, so I think that's what I think of initially when we talk about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. How about you guys?
When I think about it, I think about the effects of it, the long term effects, and how because of situations like that, you have this fear of healthcare in within the Black community. And we see it with, just the high rate of death with Black pregnant women. And a lot of it has to do with fear that's ingrained, not getting the the care that's actually needed. And there's a high population of Black people in this country that don't go to doctors for checkups. They don't trust them, and we see it today, like you mentioned, Khalil, with COVID. How many people are saying they don't want to take the vaccine because they don't trust it? Um, and so I think the effects are ongoing, and I would like to see how it will change.
I think you can go ahead, Jessica.
I just think it's crazy how you would think that just knowing whatever is happening to your body should be a basic right, or even your healthcare should be a basic right. So it's just and knowing that this happened as recently as the 1960s too, I don't know, that just shows how even though I feel like a lot of people think, oh, we've come so far since slavery, and a lot of people try to I don't know, ignore any problems that happen now, but the 60s was really recent, so this still has an effect on us today. And one thing that I found when I was doing some research for this is that only 2.6% of doctors in the United States are Black people, and that was a statistic from 2019. And that is a problem because, first of all, with this experiment, there's already a lot of distrust in the Black community of medical professionals. And then with there only being 2.6% Black doctors, that, I don't know, makes it even harder to trust.
I was gonna say that I know when we were talking about Coates, the article that we read, and how racism has created race, and how he was saying that that comes from a lot of policies. you can really see that in like how like policies in medical field, like how that honestly has also created race through racism because of kind of like what you were also saying with COVID. Like a lot of people are afraid to take the vaccine, and honestly, COVID is overrepresented in Black communities. And when you just look at these different things, like the fact that Black people are more essential workers, when you can really see that, because if you trace back to slavery and up to now and like Jim Crow and the inability for Black communities to actually grow and progress, so a lot of Black individuals are in essential worker positions, so a lot of them are overexpressed with COVID, but they can't really get tested because of insurance policies and things like that. Or the fact that like that the Tuskegee Slip experiment was able to happen, or the Mississippi appendectomies, which is the forced sterilization of Black women without their knowledge, was able to happen. Like Black people are not protected in medicine at all, and that just shows that Black lives like don't really matter. And so when you put that notion in legislature, when you put that notion in medicine, it starts to expand. And honestly, it even goes into education. Like the fact that I'm a Black woman, and I grew up in the suburbs, and I never knew anything about Black history because I'm African. So like Black American history, I never really knew anything about until I came to college, which is crazy. You would think that Black history would be something that we would learn. And so that I just feel like these different policies just extend throughout so many different ways. And that's just how race is just being created. Like it just is constantly reinforced that Black individuals don't really matter. So
And I
That's
think it's interesting how going off of that, just the fear of, this system, which rightfully so. I was listening to this guy. He's a doctor. He works in the ER, and he got a patient, and this patient had this type of rash or whatever. So the doctor was ready. He knew what he had to do, and this is a Black doctor. And when he walked into the room, he realized his patient was Black, and he had no idea how to work with like this skin condition he had. The reason being, all of his medical books only showed that condition on white skin.
Oh.
And it's crazy to think that this man went through, 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 4+ years of residency just to, not be able to cure people with his own skin. And we also see in medical books how they say that Black people can endure more pain than white people, and how Black women, and this is actually in these books, that Black women tend to over exaggerate their pain. And so it's so sad that even on one end, like you said, Jessica, I don't remember the exact number, but
2.6%.
2.6%. So you have one end where you have a community that fears healthcare, and then you have another end where those 2.6, of course, they want to help their own people, but they're not even given the chance to do that, rightfully so, because they're not giving the resources to accommodate for their own community. So it's sad all around. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. To add, I think Jessica, you pointed out, you talked about a little bit about slavery, and since the Tuskegee experiment happened in the '60s, you pointed out that.
Sorry, it happened in 1932. I just looked it up.
Okay, well, since 1930, it's all good. Where was I going? Oh, we were talking about slavery. You said something about like, in the 1930s, you would think slavery would be kind of a dismantled system, but in reality, it's kind of not. It's important to note that slavery and comes in different forms. I think that's a really important statement to make, because because the idea of what we call slavery, which is like the working in the fields and all that stuff, is not going on today. There are other policies and systems that dehumanize minority groups, and we've seen in the medical field how the dehumanization of Black people is ongoing, and it's also a form of slavery. I would consider it a form of slavery in its own way. So it's very important to note that slavery has different forms and affects minority groups um, in smaller numbers than before, but still affects them.
Um, I wanted to point out something. I just looked up a paper from a past class I took, and what you said reminded me of it. The Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which was passed in 1996, was a tremendous setback for immigrants because of the fact that it basically said that you had to be in the United States for 5 years before you can actually get insurance, which I think is also another way that like just people of color are like slaves. Like imagine like being in the United States and you come here and you know that whole cliche like American dream, which I kind of hate that whole idea, but that's a whole other story. But like, and you can't even get healthcare for like 5 years, which is kind of crazy. Or the fact that a lot of people actually wouldn't go get healthcare even with that because of the fact that even after that, because of the fact that it's something with how you don't want to be seen as too reliant on the government, because if the government thinks that you're too reliant on them, then it'll push back your ability to get refugee status in America, which is kind of crazy to me. Just like all these different factors, like that ties into healthcare so much. Like imagine like if you really have something wrong with you, like within those 5 years, and you cannot go and get like fixed. Like how can you really trust like the system that does not protect you at all?
Right.
It really is a form of slavery. Like it's I think that was a really good point.
Going off of how you were saying that like almost everything is tying into this, I also found a stat that said predominantly Black zip codes were 67% more likely to have a shortage of primary care physicians, which that ties directly into like redlining and everything like that. Like when you think redlining is already a topic that I think isn't talked about enough, and then thinking about the other effects on that, like this is having an effect on the medical field, which like off the top of your head, I feel like most people wouldn't think about that, but that's a like huge effect that there's 67% more likely to have a shortage of doctors. That's crazy.
I want to ask a question. Have y'all ever heard of environmental racism?
Yes, yes.
Oh my gosh. I just think that that is like the craziest topic because it also ties into medicine, and you just made me think of it. Like the fact that and I saw it oh, this is kind of stupid, but I saw on TikTok a dude was driving and he was driving through like a more like predominantly white neighborhood, and he found like a lot of like Whole Foods, like a lot of grocery stores, and then drove through a predominantly Black neighborhood and or just area, and he was finding like a lot of like Popeyes, Long John Silver's, like, and think about how that changes. Like if you're working already, you coming out of work, where are you gonna go first? Like just like the nearest place to you. Or like if you have a family, like how is that gonna impact your health? Because we already see that diabetes is like overexpressed in Black communities. Like it just like all ties in. Like it really does. Like it's just kind of crazy.
Exactly. And I love that you say that because on TikTok as well. TikTok is so informational. But this guy was talking about how in these redlined zones, it tends to be, I think, 12 to 15 degrees higher, because when they were, pushing minorities into certain areas, secluding them into certain areas, they were taking down the trees, cutting them down, and building, apartment buildings and, just mass production of apartments. Whereas in the suburbs, they were planting more trees and, trying to make the place look beautiful, more parks, more greenery. And so you saw with that, it's providing more oxygen in these areas, and these areas tend to be less polluted and whatnot. And so I think it's insane to see how much racism is present in almost every aspect of life, pretty much.
Yeah, that's the statement that I think about when we talk about the things we were just talking about is that the system is built to work against you, and this is exactly what we see in life today, especially for minority groups. Um, you know, I just lost my train of thought, but yeah.
I agree with you. The system is honestly really built to, with all the topics that we talked about today, you can see how the system isn't meant to benefit Black people, but it's meant to further define race, and it's meant to further create that racial stratification that we've been talking about in class. And so, thank you for listening to our podcast.
Thank you
Isn't it
guys.
15 minutes? Oh, you can go ahead.